I'd now like to introduce Deb Rodda from Yackandandah in northeastern Victoria. She's going to tell us a little bit about her club and a little bit about the use and costs of Varroa treatments for the recreational beekeeper. Over to you. Thanks, Deb.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me here tonight. I live in a gorgeous little place called Yackandandah at northeast Victoria. It's just on the New South Wales border almost, near Beechworth, Albury-Wodonga. It's a very pretty little town. We moved here about 7 years ago. Just a picture there from a guy locally has got one of those little drone things, and he takes some lovely photos from around the area, and that's most of the town. The main street is running along in the middle there. Beautiful time of the year, autumn up here with all the autumn colours. Anyone who's been to Beechworth or Bright will know it's a pretty area. So when I moved up here a few years ago now, we shifted 3 hives up. We were living at Hepburn Springs. My husband comes from Dalesford, and I moved the hives to the front of our block here. We're on about 4 acres, and it just gathered quite a bit of interest from people on and off. My husband runs a business fixing lawnmowers, etc. And so there'll be people coming up our driveway past the beehives, and they would often say, oh, I've always wondered about getting a beehive, and all the sort of things you hear. And as time went on, a few people were quite interested and wanted to know how they would go about it. And I said, well, the best thing to do really is to go to your local club, because, they'll be able to help you. And then I found out, that the closest club to here was Melbourne or Yass, 3 or 4 hours away. Things like clubs were not very prevalent up this way when we got here. There's lots of new beekeeping clubs, etc., around Melbourne and the city areas. I think probably the hobby beekeeping fraternity really got going around the year 2000 or something like that. They just, went nuts on becoming backyard beekeepers. It was a pretty new thing, but there was heaps and heaps. And of course, around the city areas, clubs got formed. But up here in the country or regional areas, that wasn't quite the case. It was just, granddad's got a hive or uncle, whatever, and then everyone does their own thing pretty much, and not being formulated or doing it according to perhaps the Department of Ag. No one's registered, all that sort of thing. So as time went on, I thought, we need to have a club here if people want to start having beehives. So I chewed over the thought for a long time and finally decided to have a go. Having a club around near where I was at Ballarat was my saving grace when I first started in beekeeping, because I got a hive quite unexpectedly, and I'd ordered one year and it never turned up. And then one winter's afternoon, I sort of get a call saying, well, I've got that hive for you a year later. And by then I decided that beekeeping looked too hard and I wasn't interested in doing it. But this guy wouldn't be put off, and the hive arrived about 6:30 the next frosty, cold morning in the dark. So I was really thrown in the deep end and had no idea. But I love my animals, and I always want to look after things, as best I can. Anyway, I was getting quite distraught over this hive. Every time I opened it, something else was happening, and I didn't have a clue what was happening, didn't even know what I was looking at, really. And I got onto these people at Ballarat. Some of you might know Scott and Amanda, and they said they were having a field day that weekend. So off I went to the field day, and anyway, they were just so much help. And so I knew firsthand that clubs were a really big help to people trying to get into beekeeping or who had started and were getting into trouble. So I decided to start a club here. The first night I had one person and 2 people say they couldn't make it. But I persevered. The next meeting there was probably 5 or 6 or something, and it's just gone sort of quite gangbusters since then. But then it wasn't long after that, really, I guess, a few months or so, 6 months, that I thought, where do people go to buy anything? There was no shops around here. You had to go to Melbourne if you needed any frames, and you couldn't sort of look and touch and feel and ask questions. It's hard buying online when you don't know what you're talking about. I had bought Paradise polyhives when I was in Hepburn Springs. The hive I had been sold was pretty rotten. The base was rotting out. So I wanted to buy a new hive for it, and I got online and looked at hives, and I found that the Paradise polyhives had huge thermal properties, and so I decided to get those for my bees. So I had 3 by the time we come up here. And then I heard, when I was looking around at perhaps thinking of starting a little shop or something, that the guy in Melbourne who was selling Paradise was closing. So I asked the people in Canberra who were importing them if I could have a go at selling them here, and they said, yeah, sure, have a go. So that's where it all began. We also, in our little club here in Yackandandah, do introduction to beekeeping courses a couple of times a year. They've been very popular, although I do believe that the beekeeping hobby has sort of really slowed off this last year or so. But we didn't do one actually this autumn like we normally do. But we've had some great times with it, and a lot of people have gone through, which has been great. Anyway, going back to the shop, I did get some paradise hives in to sell from my little honey shed. And the first person that come along, of course, said, oh, that's great, I'll try one of them. But I also need a smoker and a hive tool and a suit. Of course, I didn't have any of those things. I was just going to sell paradise hives. So it went from there. I had to buy in things to suit people. And then, of course, Paradise turned into Hive being made here in Australia now. So I'm the agent up here for Hive, which have made a lot of the things on the Paradise even better with the plastic all the way around the edges, that type of thing. So I have got a little shop here with pretty much everything in it. And so the Yackandandah Bee Club was born, and Deb's Beekeeping also. Both have been going mad. We've got about 30 people in our club now, or 35, varies up and down a little bit, and a really good roll-up once a month at our meetings. We're not incorporated. We're just very laid back, very relaxed. I run it now with Neil Padbury. Has been a big help, and he's sort of taken over things a little bit because I was getting a bit tired after 5 or 6 years of running it all, and he's sort of taking over a bit what we're going to be doing each month. We have a great roll-up, and now, of course, we've got the dreaded Varroa breathing down our necks, and so the club is going to really come into its own, I guess, with helping to get through this terrible thing coming upon us very soon. So I sort of think about as a club, as any club anywhere, and helping backyard beekeepers or hobby beekeepers, what is our role and what can we do to help? I've looked at this a little, and I guess the things that we are looking at are to give, Varroa-related info presentations in different areas of it, being partly involved in sort of helping to get the DPI New South Wales to be involved with Department of Ag to get some of those training sessions here locally. We've had one in Beechworth. Being involved in that, really trying to push for the things that we need here in our region. So we're also reminding members of the information that's easily available, particularly now coming into winter. Bees at lockdown, that's time to catch up with things, organise all your gear and all that stuff, but also try and get your head around Varroa and look at all of the different information that's freely available. And very well put together, so much of it. And there's videos, of course, from America and New Zealand and everywhere else. We also continue encouragement to our members, getting together and having discussions, trying to encourage everyone that we will get through this, particularly the initial stage. The 2 or 3 years going to be quite difficult. We're all in bushland areas here, so the mite bombs are going to be pretty horrific. Instilling the importance to folks of the regular hive checks, and head in the sand is not an option. Still getting people into my shop to buy bits and pieces. And I always ask them, are they getting prepared for Varroa? Are they ready? How are they going with all of that? And getting folks to say, oh, yeah, well, I have heard about that. So there's still going to be an awful lot of attrition when it does hit the area. A lot of hives that are not being managed terribly well now will all just go under and cause everybody else a lot of pain. We have group discussions now after our sessions, whatever it is we're talking about. What do you do when mites are first found in a wash or drone brood? Ways the club can work together with treatments. It's been mentioned tonight by Frank. I think they all want to work together. Our club is quite widespread. There's lots of miles between quite a number of members. It'll help everyone to know sort of what to do, but we are quite far flung, and that may not be all that helpful to everyone, but we'll still work on those things together and trying to help anyone who's feeling overwhelmed. Had a couple in the club who thinking of selling their hives, etc., because it's all looking too hard. And I understand how they feel, because I feel a bit the same way myself sometimes. The more information you get, the more difficult it seems to be at times. But we've just got to get started, don't we, and go through it step by step. The folks, as I mentioned, in our club are all willing to learn and trying to manage their pets compared to others around about who perhaps aren't so interested in doing these things. But the club members are very good. Demonstrations of alcohol washes have been done and testing of mites is being carried out by club members in general. Most have attended a Varroa training management day. There's one in Albury, there's been one in Beechworth, there was one down near Wangaratta. And those that miss have the opportunity at the next one on the 28th at Beechworth, although I did find out yesterday we're struggling with numbers for that one to run. The last one was booked out, so I'm a bit surprised, but they need at least 50. I think we've got about 30 at the moment, so we've been running around on Facebook, etc., trying to get those numbers over the line. Going forward, I think one of the main things that backyard beekeepers really need to be working hard on is getting in their head the life cycle of the Varroa mite. When I first started the club, I really pushed all the basic things, trying to teach people just the life cycle of the bee. You'd be amazed how many people still probably don't quite get their head around that, but you can't manage your hive if you don't understand their life cycle. And so it's going to be the same with this little critter as well and how it relates to the honeybee. The little graph there is an excellent picture to sort of give you an understanding of how the populations differ slightly in time frame to each other. When the bees at the top is sort of in November as far as peak population, the Varroa mite's peak population is sort of a little bit after summer, sort of early autumn there, and then it goes down to being dormant. And we need to sort of work on understanding that and how it's going to relate to looking after our bees, particularly coming into honey flows, etc. So that's something we're going to be working on over the next few months. And continue on, something we need to work on, and I think, again, clubs are probably trying to work on this everywhere. When are our honey flows, i.e. what ukes are flowering around our area at what time? We all need to really get that in our head. Most areas have got 4 or 5 ukes that are going to flower from early spring or late winter through till late March or late autumn. So we need to work out their flowering times, how many weeks, and note the treatments that will suit our flowering season timeline. Plan to change and mode of action if need to be. Need to retreat so that we're not going to fall into that bad habit of causing the mites to become used to a different product. Be aware that what we do at our beginning will be different in a few years. As Frank's already mentioned, we've just got to get through these first 3 or 4 years or whatever it is, because the treatment we might have to do for the first few years won't be that hard a bit later on once things have sorted out in the bush. Consider buying products in bulk to help with costs depending on numbers, opting in for the joint treatment, which we need to work on that as well, depending on when whoever in the area gets Varroa mite first, as to what we need to treat at that time, depending on the part of the season we're in. And we need to stay vigilant, to keep those tests up and to do them regularly, and not to fall into some of the media traps that people fall into, that, looking for mites on their bees' backs. If they don't see any mites on their backs, then they believe they don't have mites. And there's many things out there that people might like to think can make it easier, but we've got to do it the hard way, the right way, to get the right results. I've got a few prices here quickly that I got together from mainly these places. There's lots of different people selling the products to treat for mites. They're just some that I quickly looked at, some of the bigger ones. I haven't got any of this stuff in my store as yet. I'm just waiting to see, because it's, shelf life is not all that long on some of them. I don't want to go buying anything in until we sort of need it, if I do go down that track. I look really at just getting smaller amounts that would be treating sort of hobby beekeepers' hives. Some of them don't actually have larger amounts anyway. They are sold in smaller amounts, and if you need to get a big amount, well, you'd have to just buy more of the smaller amounts. But you can see there the synthetic product costs. Bayvarol, which is one of the favourites, quite a long shelf life, Bayvarol. And so if you're just buying the 20 strip packet, it's going to cost you about $11.40 or roughly that much per hive. Now, these prices have really varied a bit since I did this a few months ago. I did check, I think, Bayvarol, and that's an updated price. But certain companies are bringing in larger amounts, and so the prices are going to go up and down. So this is just to give you a bit of an idea. You can buy Bayvarol in 800 strips, which will do 200 hives, and that would bring the price back to about $8.70 a hive. For Apistan there, about $14 a hive. Apivar, they're all around about the 14, depending on what size packet you buy. If you've only got a few hives, it's not going to be a huge thing once the first few years are over and we settle down. 2 strips per brood box, except for Bayvarol, which is 4. So if you're running double brood boxes, you're just going to have to double that amount. Now, just check use by date when you're purchasing, if you can, if you're ringing up and asking to buy product, to make sure that they're not selling you something that's been sitting on their shelf for 6 or 8 months. If you're also wanting to hang on to it for a while, if you're using it straight away, then that's not an issue, of course. So this is the average cost of using organic products. Again, around about the same sort of dollar, except for some of your acids like Api-bioxal. It works out about $2.80 a hive if you're getting the larger amount of 350 grams. Now, these are divided up into small amounts that you need to use to mix. And you can also have a liquid for the Api-bioxal or the powder. I think people will probably be wanting to use more of that product going forward, particularly large Apis, because it is certainly the cheaper way to go. Formic Pro is very popular, fairly pricey if you're just buying a couple of doses. It's $15 or so for 20 strips, do 10 doses. And your Thymol there, you've got temperature limitations, of course, on some organic products, which is a very important thing. Make sure you consider that when it's time to use it. Currently approved products at a glance, non-synthetic and synthetic. And this will just make it a little bit easier to glance. I was talking to a chap from Department of Ag the other day who's got 150 hives, and somebody from their department has done this Excel sheet, and you can put in all sorts of parameters to work out the extra cost of treatments. He worked out for his 150 hives about $12,000 a year. I hope he makes lots of honey, because that's a fair old cost on top of what he's paying now to keep his 150 hives. So it does certainly make a big difference once you've got a few hives. But not everyone is close enough to be part of a club, and clubs aren't for everyone. Not everyone likes to go along to clubs and be told what to do or how to do it, or just don't feel comfortable in that situation, which is a shame, because there's a lot of people out there that are going to lose their hives once Varroa hits because they haven't availed themselves of some help. Many are not registered with appropriate state departments, and so they won't get picked up with information either that's being sent out. There are some hive owners not preparing themselves for Varroa or checking for mites regularly, correctly, if at all, but that's life. We'll continue to do what we can, as I'm sure you and other clubs are also endeavouring to do, to get the word out there and to help folks where we can. So that's all I really have for you tonight. The fight is on and we will get there together, but it's certainly going to be a bit of an uphill battle to start with. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Deb. That's most informative. Any comments or questions? Frank?
You don't really take all the information in until suddenly you find mites, and then you really start studying it. So
that's right, exactly.
Just had one come through from Rebecca wanting to know from Frank, was Hopguard approved in New Zealand?
No, it's never been approved. It costs about 50 or 60,000 to get it approved. It's a torturous process, and unless the market is there, our market is probably too small for that product. I don't think it'll get approved.
Is it used effectively in the US?
There's papers available from Canada when they did a trial. They 4 of them together, and the Hopguard came out third or something like that. Again, it's one of those ones that it depends on how good the bees are to move the product around.
So that's a lot of information synthesised into 2 excellent presentations. Thanks, Frank and Debbie.